partner, JCDP. Jamaica also continues to mainstream the lived realities of people with disabilities through public awareness campaigns. The government, through JCPD, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, and international partners continue to lead national campaigns to reduce stigma and promote disability rights. Honourable Ministers, with such an enabling environment for growth and progress here in Jamaica, the United Nations remains steadfast in supporting disability inclusion through strategic initiatives. One strategic initiative is the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy, UNDIS. This framework guides the United Nations efforts to embed disability inclusion across all pillars of its work. It ensures alignment with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability and the 23rd Agenda for Sustainable Development. Here in Jamaica, the United Nations Country Team Disability Inclusion Work Plan 2024-2025 has localized the global strategy and is strengthening disability inclusion within UN agencies in Jamaica. So far, the key actions that have been taken include a new non-discriminatory employment statement affirming the United Nations commitment to diversity and inclusion. I know with what's going on in the world on DEI, this could be quite controversial, but we still remain committed to, for us, that's the backbone of our work. You know, we leave no one behind. A joint UN approach to procurement and HR policies, ensuring accessibility, considerations to external venues, communications, goods and services is one of those key points that we're dealing with the UN. So if there are any business persons out there or persons with disabilities, approach the UN. We're looking to procure more and more from persons with disabilities, organizations that have those opportunities or are running businesses for persons with disabilities. Not only that, even when we select venues for UN activities, we're looking for venues to be compliant in terms of access for participants. So those really also have tailored, have made sure that we as the UN conform and we practice as we preach. We're also helping to evaluate how persons with disabilities are included in humanitarian needs, assessments, preparedness, and response plans. Clinical cases recently with Hurricane Beryl, we did go all the way to ensure that persons with disabilities were affected, were totally catered for as part of our programs which are being implemented, including those we implemented with the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Training and learning resources on disability, inclusion of UNCC staff. Within the UN, also have persons with disability. We also provide learning opportunities for them. And really mainstreaming disability and inclusion in programming strategies and communications. I'm really proud that many of our efforts are done in conjunction with local experts, including JCPD. Dr. Hendricks, who's our partner, the new declaration of intent to be signed soon between the United Nations Jamaica and JCPD will lend itself to even greater collaboration in the coming years. All in all, colleagues, friends, honorable ministers, the efforts of the United Nations will stand in alignment with Jamaica's national global commitments. Together, we are meeting the promise of the Regional UN Cooperation Framework for greater inclusion and articulation of equality and well-being, and doing so while leaving no one behind. It would be remiss of me not to say that the whole commendable progress we have made, there are areas where we must intensify efforts. These include enhancing coordination and partnerships, strengthening collaboration between government, the private sector, civil society, and international partners will be key in scaling up disability inclusion efforts. We must also continue to empower persons with disabilities and their networks. We must increase funding, capacity building opportunities for organizations of persons with disabilities and maximize their participation in policy making and decision making. We must improve data collection and utilization. Building on census data will allow for the development of more targeted evidence-based policies and programs. Let us also promote universal design standards. Encouraging universal design principles in all infrastructure and public services will enhance accessibility and inclusivity. In this regard, United Nations Jamaica is planning an accessibility assessment to improve the inclusivity of our premises in Jamaica. In conclusion, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, disability inclusion is not merely a goal. It is a necessity for a just and equitable society. It is about ensuring that no one is left behind in our collective journey towards sustainable development. The United Nations remains a steadfast partner in the efforts, working alongside the government of Jamaica, civil society, and persons with disability to foster a more inclusive and accessible society for all. I look forward to today's exchange of ideas as we move the needle forward in this equality agenda, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zulu. And your thoughts on mainstreaming disability inclusion are quite provocative. I hope to bring up some of those elements later on in the panel discussion. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we move through the program. We also have remarks at this time from the chairman of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, Mr. Colin Ebanks. Please welcome him to the microphone. And as Mr. Ebanks comes, just to say formally that having done the protocol for all of our special guests, it applies to anyone else that speaks after. So you don't have to go through the list again.
Good morning. I think our moderator saw my notes and a long list of greetings. So with all that being said, good morning and happy anniversary of the Disabilities Act. And happy Valentine's Day. It's an honor to speak with you today about the vital role that the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, JCPD, plays in advancing inclusion in Jamaica. Our work is deeply rooted in the belief that every person deserves equal opportunities. And this aligns directly with the broader global conversation about inclusion. At the JCPD, we are committed to ensuring that persons with disabilities are not only acknowledged, but are active participants in society. Inclusion is not about just accessibility. It's also about creating an environment where individuals with disabilities have the same opportunities to participate, contribute, and succeed as anyone else. Inclusion is not a one-size-fits-all concept by any means. It entails meeting individuals where they are and ensuring that our systems and society as a whole provide empowering opportunities to engage them in meaningful ways. Our work is about removing barriers, whether physical, social, mental, or institutional. Those barriers that prevent persons with disabilities from fully engaging with their communities. The strategic direction of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities is guided by 3 core principles: equal access to services and opportunities. We continue to develop and advocate for policies and practices that ensure persons with disabilities have equal access to education, healthcare, employment, and other vital services. Policy developments and its implementation serve to enhance the creation of an inclusive society that accommodates the diverse needs of persons with disabilities. There's also the aspect of advocacy for rights and legal protection. Through our Access, Compliance, and Investigation branch, as well as our legal unit, we work to facilitate legal protections for persons with disabilities, ensuring their rights are recognized and enforced. This includes monitoring the full implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Disabilities Act, and reporting on the adoption of these international and national standards that protect and promote the dignity of individuals with disabilities. Capacity building and awareness. Education is a powerful tool for changing attitudes and behaviors. As part of our strategy, we aim to raise awareness about the capabilities and contributions of persons with disabilities while providing capacity building programs to ensure that both individuals and organizations are equipped to engage inclusively. A major part of our strategic direction is ensuring that persons with disabilities are not just passive beneficiaries of policy, but active contributors. We strongly believe in inclusive policymaking. This means that persons with disabilities must have a voice in the development of the policies that directly affect their lives. We actively collaborate with government agencies, private sector partners, and community groups to ensure that persons with disabilities are included in the planning, design, and implementation of social programs and infrastructure. To ensure the sustainability of our efforts, the JCPD also focuses on accountability. We are committed to regularly monitoring the implementation of disability-inclusive policies and programs, evaluating their effectiveness, and adjusting our strategies as needed. This ensures that we are not just setting goals, but achieving real, measurable outcomes. Finally, the importance of partnerships cannot be overstated. JCPD works closely with a wide range of stakeholders, from government to non-governmental organizations, community groups, private sector, and international partners. By working together, we can maximize our impact and ensure that inclusion is woven into the very fabric of Jamaican society. In conclusion, the JCPD is at the forefront of the national conversation on inclusion. Through our strategic initiatives, we are actively dismantling barriers, advocating for equal rights, and fostering an inclusive environment where persons with disabilities are empowered to lead independent and fulfilling lives. As we continue this important work, we remain deeply committed to creating a more inclusive and just society for all Jamaicans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Ebanks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we move further into the conversation, into the program, it's important to understand the development of the movement across the years. And so we invite the Executive Director for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities to provide the historical context of I Am Able. Help me welcome Dr. Christine Hendricks to the microphone. As you come.
And yes, I accept the protocol that has already been established. Well, let me greet my minister, Minister Pernell Charles, Minister Dunn, my chairman, Dr. Zulu, and our critical partners in the room, UNICEF, UN, DP, and of course, our disability partners who have been critical in the walk and the journey to this date. It is my delight to stand before you today to reflect on the historical journey of disability inclusion in Jamaica, a journey that has seen remarkable strides in the rights and empowerment of persons with disabilities. From the grassroots activism of the 1970s to the passage of the Disabilities Act in 2014 and its coming into effect in 2022, this journey has been both challenging and inspiring. It's a journey of advocacy, policy change, and most importantly, the empowerment of individuals with disabilities. Early developments, 1970s to 80s. The disabilities rights movements in Jamaica gained significant momentum in the 1970s with growing awareness and activism within the Jamaican society. One of the earliest and most impactful movements emerged from the Jamaica Society for the Blind, JSB, where individuals who were blind began advocating for greater participation in the decision-making processes of their organization. This advocacy led to blind persons assuming leadership roles, thereby improving services for the blind and visually impaired. It marked a shift towards recognizing the importance of leadership from within the disability community itself. A pivotal moment came in 1981 during the United Nations declaration of the International Year of Disabled Persons, and many of us would remember that. I was a child, and so I remember, IYDP. This event served as a global catalyst for disability activism, inspiring local movements, including in Jamaica. The same year, the Combined Disabilities Association was formed. The CDA became an essential voice of advocacy for the broader community of persons with disabilities. The formation of the CDA also led to Jamaica becoming a founding member of Disabled Peoples International, DPI, in 1981, which provided international support and strengthened the local disability movement. National policy and legislation. The commitment toward disability inclusion in Jamaica progressed significantly in the 1990s and 2000s, with the Jamaican government beginning to formalize its commitment to addressing the needs of persons with disabilities. In 2000, the National Policy on Persons with Disabilities was approved, outlining a comprehensive framework for improving the quality of life for persons with disabilities. The policy focused on key areas such as education, employment, health, housing, transportation, and accessibility. The advocacy of the community of persons with disabilities played a crucial role in the development of Jamaica's legal framework for disability inclusion. These efforts culminated in the Disabilities Act, which was passed by the Jamaican Parliament in October 2014 and came into full effect on February 14, 2022. The Disabilities Act provides a comprehensive legal framework aimed at promoting the dignity, freedom of choice, and independence of persons with disabilities. Jamaica's role in the international landscape for disability inclusion was forward and unwavering. Jamaica, through our now Professor Floyd Morris, and then Director General of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Mrs. Faith Inerarity of blessed memory, led the charge on behalf of Jamaica with the negotiations for the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which resulted in Jamaica being the first signatory ratifying the convention when it was ready and opened in 2007. As we celebrate these milestones, these significant milestones, challenges remain. These include the full enactment of all the principles of the Disabilities Act and overcoming the persistent societal stigma surrounding persons with disabilities. However, the Jamaican government has outlined several plans to continue addressing these challenges. The expansion of the early stimulation program to reach more children with disabilities, ensuring early intervention and support. Strengthen the private sector engagement to promote inclusive hiring practices and vocational training programs. National Accessibility Plan development to enhance physical and operational accessibility across public and private sectors. The continued support for persons with disabilities through grants, vocational training, and advocacy services remains a critical priority for the Jamaican government. The role of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. The Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities has played a crucial role in advancing the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities. The need for vocational rehabilitation for persons with disabilities was recognized during the late 1960s by the then government, but practical steps to establish the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, then named the Jamaica Council for the Handicapped, were taken after a meeting with a delegation from the community of persons who are blind with Deputy Prime Minister at the time, the Honorable Seymour Mullings, in 1972. Arising from that meeting, the government of Jamaica officially requested the International Labour Organization to assign an expert in the vocational rehabilitation field, and Mr. Edward George Johnson was dispatched. Mr. Johnson, an ILO expert, arrived around March 1973 to advise the government on the establishment of the JCH, Jamaica Council for the Handicapped at the time, which came into being in July 1973. During his first 2 years, the council established sheltered workshops such as Fort Charlotte in Lucy, Hanover, Boat Yard in Port Antonio, Portland, Paradise Prince in Kingston, a workshop at the Maypen Infirmary in Clarendon, the Assessment and Guidance Center in Kingston. The Assessment and Guidance Center started as a pre-vocational center to prepare clients for the sheltered workshops. In 1973, a national registration program and needs assessment of persons with disabilities was conducted. Out of this needs assessment, several programs were established. One of these programs was the Office Training Center, which was built in September 1977, but closed in 1981. This provided training in clerical, secretarial, and accounting skills, along with English language and mathematics. Psychology was also introduced to encourage self-confidence, self-esteem, and motivational exercises. Daily living skills was also an integral part of the training. The Office Training Center created opportunities for gainful employment for several students with disabilities. The value of this program is spoken about to this day. The Early Stimulation Program was adopted by the then Ministry of Pension and Social Security in 1977 and administered by the Council until 2010, when they began fully operating as an individual agency under the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Fundraising activities and public education programs assisted with the development of the Council. The JCPD, as a statutory body, continues to serve as a primary government agency responsible for advising the government, advocating for policy changes, and monitoring the implementation of the Disabilities Act. Our role includes collaborating with persons with disabilities to ensure they have a meaningful voice in the development of policies that affect their lives. Through this collaboration, the JCPD has contributed significantly to the national conversation on disability inclusion, ensuring that persons with disabilities participate in creating information that is shared both with them and the wider public. Our efforts alongside the government, civil society, private sector, and our UN partners, such as UNICEF, have been solidifying our efforts over the years in helping to build a more inclusive Jamaica. In conclusion, the journey of disability inclusion in Jamaica has been marked by tremendous growth and progress, from the early activism of the 1970s and 80s to the legislative milestones of the Disabilities Act and the ongoing efforts of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities under the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. While much has been achieved, the journey is far from complete. We must report internationally annually through the Conference of States Parties at the UN and every 4 years to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on how Jamaica is implementing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and, by extension, the Disabilities Act. We have much work to do, and so we must continue to push for the full implementation of the Disabilities Act, combat stereotypes, and create a society where persons with disabilities can fully participate in all aspects of life. Together, we can build a Jamaica that truly upholds the dignity, rights, and independence of every individual, regardless of their ability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to hear from the Honorable Minister as he gives us an overview of the vision of I Am Able. Please welcome the Honorable Pernell Charles Jr.
Thank you so much. Let me, of course, acknowledge our moderator, Mrs. Paula Ann Porter Jones, who is certainly a national treasure here in Jamaica, for those who don't know. Yes, you can give that a round of applause. My Minister of State, Minister Dunn, my Chief Technical Director, who is here as well, Mrs. Audrey Dear Williams, trying to hide there. Also, my very special Mrs. Gunter Gale, who is here. Could you stand up, please, Mrs. Gunter Gale, so they can see your wonderful face? Yes? Who is here with the early stimulation program that is critical to all of what we're doing here as well. I'm going to get in trouble having called out specific names, but all who are here, including my chairman, Chairman Banks, Chairman Emil Leiber, who I see here as well from the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, Mr. Grant, CEO of Jeff, who is here. Of course, my brother, Dr. Zulu, just a cool name. Representing the UN here, my friends from UNICEF, who are always present and so supportive with us. Olga and the team. Of course, the team from the PSOJ. Yes, a round of applause. The team from the PSOJ, represented by Ms. Renee Morrison, our Executive Director of the Jamaica Association for Intellectual Disabilities, Mrs. Marilyn McCoy, who is here, Mrs. Kimberly Sherlock Marrott Blake, Executive Director of the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, of course, our own Dr. Christine Hendricks, who is here with the team from the JCPD, and the remainder of the staff from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, and our friends from the community who are here. And just so that he doesn't go back to Longville Park and talk my name in a bad way, Mr. Ovestra King from my constituency, who is here, and others, yes, members from the media. Very important for you to be here, because this is an important message to send to Jamaica and to the world, especially invited guests. The honor is mine to introduce and to invite and to encourage all of Jamaica to understand what we mean when we say, I am able, you are able. And so, this morning, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, together with the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, we are joined with our key stakeholders and representatives from the disabilities community, the private sector, the media, and of course, UNICEF. And this is an important anniversary for us. I've tried my best to get as close to red as I can. Paula, you can see. Yes, I've tried. Yes. And so we also know that it is a special day for many who are spreading love in many different ways. And we're spreading love today, I might say. We're spreading love by acknowledging the hard work of the JCPD and all of our partners that has brought us to where we are today. We're spreading love by acknowledging and highlighting this anniversary, our anniversary. We should have a cake with 3 candles to say, yes, that we've had the Disabilities Act in effect now for 3 years. And there's no coincidence, Colin, that it was February 14th, 2022, that it came into effect. I think that it was a magical reality coexisting, so that we will always remember that when you think of love, you think of the Disabilities Act, because that's what it's about. The Disabilities Act exposes Jamaica to the many ways that we can distinguish ourselves as a loving country, as a caring country, as a country that values all of our assets. And so we're proud to have the legislation that creates a comprehensive framework for us to protect and promote the rights of persons with disabilities in our country. It also means that we have the responsibility of ensuring that we educate our citizens, that we encourage our citizens, and we empower them with the knowledge and the tools to spread this love. And so the I Am Able campaign, that initiative coined by us with a particular focus on persons with disabilities, but I want you to think about it. Isn't it every Jamaican that is impacted by this powerful message? Don't we all need to hear it, regardless of our circumstances? Many of our senior citizens are also within the cohort of having some limitation that we want to break free We don't want Jamaica to see any ceilings. We want Jamaica to see opportunities. I remember when I first spoke as minister, I was listening to the moderator speak about persons with disabilities, and I said to myself, you know, it's funny how technology and innovation has changed the world. Had I been born a century ago with the absence of the innovation that allowed me to having contacts now, or to wear glasses, I'd have a serious issue navigating this world. So there's a need for us to appreciate that when we define others based on what we see as their disability, we limit our own self. Every single person in Jamaica needs to understand that this legislation is about them. It is not about persons with disabilities. We all need to take up the legislation and read it and let it become a part of our daily operation, whether it is in our church, our school, our business, government, private sector, because we are all able. We are all able. I'm proud that we have this campaign. I'm proud to know that myself and Dr. Dunn jointly are leading a ministry that is making this kind of impact on our country. I'm very, very honored to have leaders giving their time who I know have a lot of things to do other than be the chairman of the Disabilities Rights Tribunal or the chairman of the JCPD or members of our board. I know that it is your dedication and your commitment that has caused you to see this as a purposeful venture. And I want to continue to encourage you and to thank you and to ensure that together we are going to use this panel discussion to confront the challenges, to have some rigorous discussions, because I've always said it, and I'll say it again. We have a lot of persons to applaud in terms of the achievements that we've made in the last 3 years. But I hasten always not to belittle, but to highlight that though we see that the journey to 1,000 miles starts with one step, and we've taken a number of those steps, we have a far way to go. We still have too many sidewalks that cannot be traversed. We still have too many buildings that are central, critical buildings to government and private sector that are not sufficiently accessible. We still have too many spaces where the operation itself, not just the infrastructure, is unacceptable in terms of the standards that we require through this legislation. And if we talk about support in health, education, employment, transportation, then it is incumbent on us as a government to take the steps to have a practical way for all Jamaicans to be able, well, I should leave it there, to be able. So the government has done some things, and I was even talking to Minister Vaz and saying, sometimes we focus so much on the negative that we don't realize that the government, this government, your government, has been able to ramp up the transportation system with 250 buses. That's in what, 24 months or so. And of those buses, 10% have been strategically designed for accessibility. Now my question as the chief advocate for persons with disabilities is it enough? And so for us, we're going to continue to challenge government, to challenge private sector, to challenge ourselves, to do what we can to make sure that we are sufficient while we also say, yes, we applaud this Prime Minister and government for what has already been achieved. And I'm glad to be a part of that team. Let me just move quickly. We have a video to show. I believe that we should move to the video now that I will explain, and then we move into the video will define, will show really some of the key achievements of the JCPD since the promulgation of the Act 3 years ago. So here we go.
Since the promulgation of the Disabilities Act 2014 on February 14, 2022, these are the key achievements of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. The Margaret Moody Scholarship awarded 6 scholarships to returning students. There was also the establishment of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. There was one draft of the Code of Practice on Employment that was developed. 979 applications were received for registration. The establishment of the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. Out of the establishment, 33 complaints of discrimination received. 24 of those complaints were investigated, and 6 were referred to the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. 1,200 stakeholders were engaged on the JCPD's Mandate and Disabilities Act. The Complaints of Discrimination framework was also developed and piloted. 1,267 applications for registration was received. For the facilitation of greater ease of access to benefits, an international access symbol was placed on the NIDS cards. For the years 2024 to 2025, 2,147 stakeholders were engaged on the JCPD's Mandate and the Disabilities Act. 22 complaints of discrimination received. 5 of those complaints were investigated and 2 were referred to the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, and 9 is still being accessed. 1,311 registrations processed. Still in the year 2022 to 2025, JCPD and UNICEF Jamaica launched the digitization project to enhance the confidential registry for persons with disabilities. Client files have been processed through this project. The mobile application pilot for registration and services launched in partnership with UNICEF Jamaica. 1,460 care packages distributed under JCPD and UNICEF collaboration for the Hurricane Beryl Relief Project. In partnership with the RGD, under Operation Birthright, 6,000 persons with disabilities without birth certificates will benefit. There was a partnership with the Ministry of Health and Wellness to allocate approximately 51 million to the New Life New Limb project.
Yes, a round of applause. So what it means is that we have some real tangible achievements, and it is critical for us as we move forward to salute that and to really appreciate and acknowledge everyone that has contributed. Many of the names you're not going to hear. Many of the persons who have contributed, you may not see them, but they have played their role, and we want to acknowledge all of the Jamaicans, all of our friends who have brought us to where we are now. Now I'm going to go through a presentation that will assist us with the overview and will introduce to us in a little bit more detail the I'm Able initiative. All right, I'm going to try. There you go. Great. And I want it to be known that I was the one who put the blue in I'm Able initiative. That was my contribution to the slides. It really lit it up, I must say. All right. Okay, now, for all of us, we can agree easily. We want a Jamaica where everyone thrives. And that means not just surviving. it means being able to achieve that full potential. And at Jamaica, where you have that, is a Jamaica where you have the I Am Able initiative in action. And the I Am Able initiative is one that really calls for all of our citizens, regardless of your abilities, to be able to have that full potential. And there are some key pillars. Equality, which means equal opportunities for all of our citizens. Inclusion, of course, which is not just getting you into the room, but having you in the room involved in the mechanisms, in the operation, what's taking place. And empowerment. And empowerment is a word which is often used, but I don't know if it is fully understood. Empowerment is more than just handing a tool. It is providing a tool and providing the knowledge and providing the support to make sure that based on your circumstances, you can unlock your potential. And so we want to have equality, inclusion, and empowerment as key pillars of this initiative. Now, you would have seen all of the achievements that were displayed in our previous video. And as we said before, as we look and acknowledge our achievements, we also acknowledge the challenges, the barriers that we have to inclusion. And we know that there are some significant barriers. And if you have any conversation with persons with disabilities, they are bold, they are articulate, they communicate the issues, and they really do make an effort to ensure that others understand what it means to have limited access or restricted access to transportation. I mean, a friend of mine who I was speaking to, went into detail to really define for me the challenge that he has in just accessing the steps to go into the bus. And sometimes we take things for granted, but there is technology now that will alleviate those issues. And so that's why we have as a policy now for 10% of those buses to be sufficiently fitted to at least reduce that restriction. Also, a big ticket item is the discrimination. Any discussion that you have around persons with disabilities will center around the ignorance of other persons in how they discriminate against persons based on their disability. And this is something that we really seek to reduce. And of course, the inaccessible infrastructure, which I think we all understand. It just simply means consideration and putting into consideration when you are building. So our architects, our engineers, all of those project managers. And, as Dr. Hendricks often says, you think that you're building that ramp for me. You may have your own circumstance, even if it is not permanent, where that ramp will come into some kind of facility for you. So let's all be considerate as we build the Jamaica that we seek to develop. Now, the Disabilities Act 2014, which came into effect in 2022, as you know, we defined it as a comprehensive legal framework to protect and promote the rights of persons with disabilities. But it is much more. And we have broken down for you in simple format. I think it's on the next slide. Yes. 10 key highlights of the Disabilities Act of Jamaica. And the first, of course, is the establishment of the JCPD. And it established the JCPD as a body corporate, as well as establishing the Board of Management, which is now led by Colin Ebanks and a team, a passionate team of members. And the JCPD is defined as the primary body with the responsibility now of driving this message, of protecting and promoting the rights, and of creating the register and the facility to give support to persons with disabilities in our country. The second is the creation of the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, which is led by Emil Leiber. And that, for me and for many others, not just because I'm an attorney, but for many others, is perhaps the highlight achievement. I think it distinguishes Jamaica regionally, and it really brings us up to standards in terms of international participation. And it offers a pathway, a route for Jamaicans to be able to make a complaint if they feel there is discrimination in any aspect of their interactions, particularly employment. Number 3 is protection against discrimination in employment, of which the Disabilities Rights Tribunal is the primary asset to assist in that way. And it is really for you to understand how to access, and all of that is in the legislation. And again, I know that I learned when I was in law school, and I asked the question of my lecturer, why is the law written like this? And he jokingly said to me, and if everybody can understand it, you will not have a job. But modern day legislation is broken down into more simple terms because we want everybody to understand it. We want you to be able to pick up that legislation. And if you do, and I implore you, pick up the legislation. Don't just take what I'm saying. Take it, read it. You will see how to access, go to the JCPD, make your complaint. It will be assessed. They will determine whether it will go to the alternative dispute resolution or whether it will go to the tribunal, and it goes through. And that's how you protect yourself and protect others. Next is equal access to education and training. For this to come to fruition, it means that you have to look on a number of things, from the accessibility checklist, the guide, the infrastructure, to the operations, to the training of the teachers, etc., etc. This is Gunter Gale, who runs the early stimulation program, who takes care of all of our children with disabilities under 6 years old. A massive responsibility. She can tell you of some of the concerns that she has, and we're discussing ways now to see how we can assist in terms of improving that facility and expand it across Jamaica. 5th is accessible public transportation and infrastructure. I think we've spoken about that enough. 6 is the right to health care and medical services. And of course, it means that persons with disabilities have a right to the same level of care, if not better, as the general population, including access to preventative and other rehabilitative support and emergency support that they may require. Number 7 is access to public information and communication. And of course, it means that public and private entities should ensure that persons with disabilities can access information in the formats that suit their needs. And can I just say this quickly? It is difficult for many Jamaicans, and part of what we have to do, Dr. Hendricks, Dr. Dunn, is to break down the range of disabilities, because many Jamaicans who want to be supportive just don't understand how to be supportive. And for them, when they think of a disability, they see a wheelchair. And they don't understand that there is a wide range of physical, intellectual, other disabilities. And so a part of this initiative is not to berate and to at least to penalize or to identify what you're doing wrong, but rather to present for you the tools for you to have the sufficient understanding of how to treat with these issues. 8th would be equal participation in social, cultural, and recreational activities. 9, right to participate in public and political life. And of course, you don't have to tell anybody that Floyd Morris and others are an example of that being active in Jamaica. And 10, I'd say, is the penalties for non-compliance, which means that the legislation requires you to comply with all of the various clauses that have been set out, the sections set out in terms of the mandate, whether you're a company, whether you're a government, whether you're a private sector, of how to treat with persons with disabilities. And the penalties help for us now to enforce the rights of persons with disabilities and to hold the society accountable for the goals of the Act. Now, the I Am Able initiative critically is going to be that public education campaign to echo across the nook and cranny of our country the message that all of us are able, and that every Jamaican should play our part in ensuring that we create a society where persons of all abilities are valued, respected, and empowered. And the three pillars that we're looking on is empowerment, providing the resources and the support, inclusion, removing the barriers to participation and opportunity, which is really creating a pathway to success. And I wanted to tell you quickly, if we do this, the result will be unbelievable. The result will be the creation of unlocking of potential that we would not normally be able to foresee. Even in my own interactions, I can tell you, I was just talking about a function I had in my constituency in January 3rd. We call it Joyful Hearts Outreach, where we invited senior citizens, persons with disabilities, and vulnerable families to one place. And would you know that Mr. Vestra King and his friends who came to represent persons with disabilities, they came and took over the entire event. When I say take over now, I mean nobody remembers anything else. I gave a nice long speech. Not even the cleaner carried. All they carried was how the blind community stole the show. And I mean, I could never be prouder, because we were able, and I don't mean just proud of Vestra. He doesn't need us to lift him up. It is proud of my team, because they saw the importance of this and created this facility. And I can tell you they haven't stopped talking yet about the amazing result, the explosion of energy that came just from creating that opportunity. And it was not planned. This is not something that was on our agenda. They just came in, took over, and this was the result. So empowerment, inclusion, opportunity, I say it will lead to amazing success. Partnership with purpose. Now, of course, and I'm going to move quickly ahead. I can see Dr. Hendricks saying, Minister, time, you're being a politician, hurry up. The success of this initiative depends on all of us working together. That's what it means. It's pretty simple. I don't need to go into it further. We have to work together, we have to collaborate, we have to partner if this is actually going to be sustainable, like anything else in life. And so this initiative will design projects to fit the specific needs of that range of persons with disabilities and invite local, regional, international groups, individuals to come in and give support. And this initiative that we call I Am Able is going to partner with another initiative that we have started, which is the Jamaica Partnership Program, which, coming out of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, will provide an opportunity for us to make it easier, simpler, to coordinate efforts to connect solutions to challenges and people to people. Many times you have Jamaicans who are living in New York or wherever, and they want to give back. But they don't know what to do. They don't know what to give back to. They just want to give back to Jamaica. Well, we are going to create a set of projects that will be defined to meet the specific needs of persons with disabilities that you can participate in. We are going to also provide you with the support that if you have a project and you want to make it work in Jamaica, we give you that support through the Jamaica Partnership Program. And if you have the support, if you, like Mrs. Blake, if you have the money in your pocket and you want to give but you're not sure how or to what, we will work with you to define a purposeful project. I extended this to the service clubs when I spoke to them within the last 2 months. Rotary Club and, no, Kiwanis. And I would love for them to be among the first partners in the Jamaica Partnership Program and for us to define a project. Maybe one, maybe separate projects that will allow for us to see the network of that large network between Kiwanis and Rotary focusing their support and energy and effort on a project that will make a massive difference. Maybe the early stimulation program, our children with disabilities, which I think would be a very good project to start with. Of course, so this is government, business, and communities. Next is the role of technology. And of course, you know, we have assistive devices, we have web accessibility, we have mobile apps, and if you talk to any of our friends, they'll tell you that they have different types of devices depending on the circumstance that they are in, and we must help. Again, the projects that we spoke about will also assist in us defining the technology, depending on the situation, and getting support to provide the access in terms of resources for us to be able to empower the persons with disabilities. And UNICEF, I'm glad you're here. I know that you have a lot of the resources, not just financially. I mean, I'm not saying not financially, but I know you have the resources in terms of the network that can tap into the technology being used elsewhere that we could adopt here in Jamaica. Looking forward to that. Thank you. And by that clap, I imagine it means that you have accepted and said yes. Wonderful, wonderful. Jamaica is a wonderful place. So the I Am Able initiative, again now. So equality, inclusion, empowerment. And as you see it, it's equality, opportunities for all. Inclusion is participation in our society. And empowerment, again, you know what that means. And we want to see a Jamaica where our people are recognized, respected, and provided with an opportunity to be all they can be. I want Jamaica to be that place where other countries have to be calling us, calling Dr. Dunn and saying, Dr. Dunn, I hear that you're a minister of state at the Ministry of Labor. How can I get this project in St. Vincent? How can I get it in Barbados? Can you visit us to tell us what you're doing in Jamaica? Because we hear that you're doing it so well. That's what we want. We want a Jamaica where we will see and hear many of our persons with disabilities saying, listen, man, it's the Chairman Lieberman. We just went up to him and talked to him, and we realized that, boy, we feel safe. Doesn't mean that we were right, but at least we know that we're heard and we're valued, and our complaint is not just put in some kind of rubbish bin, but it is respected. I'm finishing, Dr. Hendricks. I can see your face. All right. All right, so the call to action, which I'll leave that, that's supposed to come after, right? Yes, so I'll leave that. Dr. Dunn will do that for me because I have to run at a certain point. But let me just close off by saying this. We are at a critical point. I want to acknowledge Senator Floyd Morris, my church brother as well. We don't talk politics in church. But I want to acknowledge him, and I want to acknowledge the several other Jamaicans who, despite challenges, have proven that with the right attitude and determination, you can make it. I want to acknowledge the 2 females that we took out of the Abilities Foundation Agricultural Program who became the first 2 female farm workers sent by this minister and Minister Dunn overseas in a deliberate way as part of our farming program, because they have done so well that they have opened the door for others because of their hard work, Mr. Grant. We had a call for 2 more. So we now have 2 more that have gone up, 2 males. And because of their hard work, I just received another request for more. And this is the first time I'm announcing it. And I said it when we started this discussion about a year and a half ago, that I've been so inspired by my friends who have shown me that those of us who are yapping and complaining about what we can't do, when there are others that are in situations that we would not want to be in and getting it done, it is your attitude that you need to change. And when you change that attitude, you find that you become more purposeful. Yes? And I knew that we would depend on the persons with disabilities to go up and show off. And they have really made Jamaica proud, and they're going to continue to do so. The last thing I'll say is this. The Disabilities Act requires us in Section 48, I believe it is, to do a review. And we have initiated that process. We will be defining a joint select committee of Parliament, of both houses, to review the Act and to ensure that we provide a full assessment to identify any gaps in terms of the legislative framework, and to look on the standards and the application in the Act. And so I take this opportunity, because I may not see you all in this format again, to say to all of you that we encourage your participation in that process. We want all of Jamaica and all friends of Jamaica to participate in making sure that our legislative framework is not just strong, but that it is relevant and that it continues to be relevant going forward. I want to thank you. Thank you very much. One love.
Thank you so much, Minister. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move into a second phase of our time together. So I'm going to say thank you to those of you who assisted in the first half of our program. And we are going to now ask that we rearrange the seating for the panelists. So I think there are some microphones that are being put on. I know we're going to ask Dr. Zulu, thank you so very much. We're going to ask that we put beside the Honorable Minister, Dr. Christine Hendricks. Mr. Leiber, I think you will be beside Dr. Hendricks. Mrs. Marilyn McCoy will be beside Mr. Leiber. Mrs. Marriott Blake will be next, and then Mr. Grant, where you are. Now, our panel discussion, of course, will have us hearing from the panelists in the initial stage. And afterwards, if you have a question or a comment, then we will facilitate those questions and comments. And we'll let you know when that is possible. And we will, of course, have a microphone available for you to use. I would like to formally introduce our panelists at this time. And we will start with the Honorable Minister, Pernell Charles Jr. He was appointed Minister of Labor and Social Security on May 22 in 2023. Before that, he was Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. He's a two-time Member of Parliament, currently serving in Southeast Clarendon, and has served in multiple other capacities. Government Senator, Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Minister of State in the Ministry of National Security. I'm going to pause the list there. There's more. He's an attorney at law. You heard him telling tales from his days in law school earlier. He's qualified to practice law in Jamaica and in the United States of America. Throughout his professional career, he served with distinction as a judicial clerk, senior clerk of court, crown counsel at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and as lead counsel and managing attorney of the law offices of Pernell P. Charles, Jr. He is a former president of the Law Society and a former guild president at the University of the West Indies, where he earned 2 honors degrees, a Bachelor of Science, a double major in biochemistry and zoology, and a Bachelor of Laws. Plus, he holds a Master of Laws degree from the George Washington University Law School, where he was awarded the Thomas Bergenthal, did I say that right? The Thomas Bergenthal Scholarship for Academic Performance. You've seen him, you've heard him, you know his passion for community service. And as a youth advocate, he participates in community activities geared toward uplifting underserved communities and protecting the most vulnerable. He also continues to serve as the chairman of the UNESCO Youth Advisory Council. Our Honorable Minister. Beside the minister is the lady whom you heard speak a little before. We'll hear more now. Dr. Christine Hendricks, Executive Director of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Now, a passionate advocate for the education and empowerment of persons with disabilities. She is the current Executive Director of the JCPD, and her commitment to enhancing the total well-being of Jamaica's children is rooted in the church and focuses on the essential ingredients for a sound society: good parenting and healthy marriages. She herself has been married for 30 years. She's a qualified teacher and counselor with a doctoral degree in transformational leadership with a focus on cultural transformation, and she also has a master's in counseling psychology. Dr. Christine Hendricks. Beside Dr. Hendricks, we have Mr. Emile Leiber. He is the managing partner of the firm Dunn Cox, a former president of the Jamaican Bar Association, first vice president of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, and the first appointed chairman of the Disabilities Tribunal. He's a member of the Board of Management of Tax Administration Jamaica, a director of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, a member of the First Instance Tribunal of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission, and he brings over 22 years of experience as an attorney at law, practicing in the areas of entertainment, did I say entertainment? Employment law, which must be entertaining for him, commercial litigation, property law, and maritime law, acting for international and local clients, appearing in the courts at all levels. He's appeared in front of the Joint Select Committees of Parliament, made submissions on draft legislation on behalf of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce and the Jamaican Bar Association, a contributor to the World Justice Project and Doing Business reports, and he's authored articles that have been published locally and internationally. He's also an associate tutor in civil procedure and practice at the Norman Manley Law School and has advised on matters involving the law relating to strata developments, restrictive covenants, contested sales, applications for statutory approvals, and commercial developments. There's more, but I'll stop there. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Emile Leiber. Beside him is Mrs. Marilyn McCoy, the Executive Director of the Jamaica Association on Intellectual Disabilities, with responsibility for steering the organization and managing its operations. Now, she holds a master's degree in special education, a diploma in teaching, a certificate in NGO professional management, and she's an advocate with over 40 years' experience in supporting people with intellectual disability. Her nonprofit career started in 2001 after 16 years as an educator. And in that role, she's collaborated with agencies to strengthen the systems of support to persons with ID, coordinated schools to work transitions and adult services, designed programs to strengthen the participation of persons with intellectual disability in employment, and empower key stakeholders to facilitate their success. She serves in various capacities on the boards of different organizations. She's presented at several local and international conferences and workshops focused on building awareness about disabilities and promoting special initiatives involving the participation of persons with intellectual disability. Mrs. Marilyn McCoy. Next is Kimberly Sherlock Marriott Blake and Company. Kimberly has a passion for national development. She believes that the inclusion of persons with disabilities and the development of the social sector are critical factors needed for sustainable development to be truly achieved. She holds an MSc in International Development with special focus on poverty, inequality, and development from the University of Birmingham. She has a BSc in Child and Adolescent Development with a minor in Early Childhood Education from the University of Technology, Jamaica. She is an Immaculate Conception High School alumnus, a U.S. Embassy International Visitor Leadership Program alumnus, a 2016 Chevening Scholar, a 2018 Prime Minister's Youth Awardee for Excellence in Youth Development, and there are other awards. In her professional capacity, she's Executive Director of the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, managing the development of the over 85-year-old organization with the support of a well-rounded management team, staff, and board, working to provide a range of services to the deaf and hard of hearing community in Jamaica. She also sits on the Board of Management for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, as well as the Board of Directors for the Public Broadcasting Corporation of Jamaica and the Executive Board of the Center for Voluntary Social Services. Her work and efforts have been inspired by the words of Professor the Honorable Sir John Golding, founder of the Mona Rehabilitation Center in Jamaica. The greatest of all mistakes is to do nothing because we can do so little. Kimberly Sherlock Marriott Blake. And closing our list of panelists today is Mr. O'Neill Grant. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica Employers Federation. He constantly expresses that without there being employers, there can be no employees, and vice versa. So his work with the JEF has been to create and enhance workplace harmony in line with the objectives of the JEF. He has extensive experience in public administration and negotiations and has led and participated in several fora, locally, regionally, internationally, including at the International Labour Conference. He was awarded the Order of Distinction Officer Class for his work to the trade union movement and the public sector. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. O'Neill Grant. Now, this is where all of my talking stops and all of their talking begins. And the minister gets obliged since he was speaking just before. Dr. Hendricks, I hope you're ready. Our first question is one that tries to understand the challenges that the council has encountered in monitoring compliance. We learned that the act came into effect. It was put together in 2014, came into effect in 2022. What challenges have you had in monitoring compliance with the Act? And after you tell me that, what measures are being taken to overcome those challenges?
Okay, thank you so very much. In terms of the challenges for monitoring the Disabilities Act, has been largely human and financial resources, of course, and we can understand that if it is that we are going to monitor right across Jamaica, adequate human resources would be required. I did provide a scope of the disability inclusion landscape historically, and the JCPD, having started as a department within the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the Disabilities Act established it as a statutory body. So we moved from employment of persons from 8 to now we have an organization or 72. Of course, we look at 8 to 72 and think that that's a huge, we have closed the gap in a huge way. However, if we are to cover Jamaica and adequately monitor the Disabilities Act with all the infrastructure and what is required, we will need to be everywhere. And so partnerships will be critical in ensuring that we work with our ministries, agencies, and departments that have responsibility for this critical aspect of Jamaica's development, the infrastructure. Our Ministry of Local Government, we have a representative on our board, and we work closely to look at how we can adequately ensure that our infrastructural development is better than it is in terms of making it universal design, as our UN representative spoke to earlier, ensuring that it is more, our accessibility is greater. And so we have launched a checklist as well in 2023, an accessibility checklist that will be it's a quick checklist, as it says. It's a quick guide to identify the challenges of the infrastructure for easy fix. And so this checklist, we will seek to work with the Ministry of Local Government, as they have responsibility for the Building Code and the Building Act, to ensure that somehow there is some synergy and introduction of it as a critical tool to help persons identify and make the necessary changes, and in their building ensure that the standards are upheld. I know that the Building Code indicates the varying standards. However, from time to time, persons somehow vary from the standards that are there, and so the buildings end up not being as accessible. But we are in discussion with our partners to ensure that this becomes a vital tool in our approvals of building plans. So that's one solution we're working towards. When we think of our human resources, I indicated that we might not get everybody that we need, but we can forge partnerships with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. They have a large cadre of social workers to help us not only to identify our persons with disabilities, but also to facilitate them benefiting from social services, not only from the JCPD, but the Ministry of Labor and Social Security has a plethora of programs that can serve vulnerable persons, and they be included. We also have other programs, other social programs in varying ministries, Ministry of Agriculture through RADA, and we have quite a number of persons with disabilities who are farmers who would benefit from such. And so that's a resolution to our human resource challenge. The next issue that we have found is the paucity of data on disability that we have had. And we have over the years through Statin been collecting data. However, we know that there's more to be done in terms of having a specific census possibly done on persons with disabilities, because there are varying numbers. The WHO speaks of 10%, and in recent times have indicated a 15 to 17% of the population of developing countries. And that would put us anywhere between 450,000 to 500,000 persons with disabilities in Jamaica. The JCPD has 17,000, over 17,000, a little over 17,000 persons in its database. What does that say to us? That we are a far way from getting to reaching the number of persons with disabilities in Jamaica to have them registered. And so you would have heard the minister in his presentation in Parliament reaching out to the parliamentarians and all of Jamaica to help us identify persons. Because you know the truth, almost every Jamaican has an individual who has a disability in their family. Some might not have come to the place of acceptance and recognition of that individual with a disability. But if it is that as persons or as Jamaicans, we recognize, and as Minister says, we define disability, because there are many persons with disabilities who do not identify themselves as a person with a disability because they have been so empowered. They do not know or recognize that they have a disability. I tell persons all the time that I was born with a disability and didn't know until I came into Kingston and learned from the previous director that, did you know you have a disability and can register? I said, a what? And he said, you have a disability. And I said, really? Where? And he said, your fingers. And I was like, oh, that's what you call it? Because my grand aunt made sure I was no less, I did not learn less, I did not participate less in my family. And so there are persons who have disabilities that they do not recognize or identify. And so those are persons that we also need to capture, separate from apart from those that are severe disabilities and very obvious, you know, so the range of disabilities, important. We also spoke, well, very critical. The Washington Group of Questions has been provided through the UN for bodies like Statin to utilize in collecting data.
Could you help us? What is the Washington Group of Questions?
The Washington Group of Questions, it's two sets of questions. There's a long set of questions and there's a short group of questions that help to identify areas that will define disability. So when you go, you have a set of questions that you go and ask when you're doing a census. So when you're doing the census, it will help to identify critical aspects of situations of persons with disabilities. So it will speak to what it is that identifies the person with a disability, what it is that would identify their employment status. So help to collect the data about the person with the disability to better help us to have those numbers and disaggregate those numbers for use and for policy development and program development and so on. So those questions, it's critical to be utilized in our census. Over time, we have selected a few of those to include in our census, which leaves off some persons or which does not identify persons with disabilities in all the areas that we need to have the information on. So it is important, I believe, that a census for persons with disabilities specifically be done. And that is something that I have mentioned to our international partners, that it is something that we will need to look at in terms of how we can get the number, the real number of Jamaicans who have disabilities. We have been identifying through the disability organizations, through the early stimulation program, through the JCPD, but it is still not everybody, because we still, as I said, 500,000, 17,000. So we can see the gap there. Additionally, policy change. Policy changes take some time. And that's one of the challenges that we have, because we have policy in Jamaica, and for it to become inclusive, every ministry, every agency, every department, every private sector need to understand their role that they play in ensuring disability inclusion. And so this I'm Able initiative is one in which the minister, having identified a whole of Jamaica approach in disability inclusion, will help us to know that when you have a policy, ensure that it is so crafted that disability comes out in it. You are deliberately targeting persons with disabilities, employment, so workplace hiring practices, varying policies across Jamaica. We need to ensure that disability inclusion comes into it. That is the only way that we'll be able to ensure, or when we have our report, we'll be able to report to the UN that persons with disabilities are included in every facet of
and
life.
We definitely, if people are intentional with the policies, with instituting policies like this, that is surely a way to ensure compliance. I want to take your question and toss it across. So, Mr. Lieber, you have the experience, I think I said it, strata development, restrictive covenants, all of those things having to do with building and providing housing and so on. We spoke to some persons, Doc referred to situations where perhaps some people get away. So you're building, but for some strange reason, they happen to bypass the area that says there should be these facilities, these ways of accommodating persons with disabilities. How much of an issue do you see that as for us in Jamaica, both in terms of, I want to use the term legacy, but buildings that are already in place and the ones that we are now erecting?
All right, thank you for that. Well, let me first say that the tribunal, we only address complaints as they come to us. So we can't originate matters, but things of that nature in terms of housing, there's a duty of reasonable accommodation, because there's this balance that you have to strike in the Jamaican society. Because I'm sure there are some persons who will say, well, if I were to put in a ramp, put in an elevator, put in those things, that would make my project or development cost prohibitive and that type of thing. And so you managing the whole, what I call conflict between ability of persons to be compliant along with the obligation to facilitate persons with disabilities, I think is one of the difficulties that we're going to continually have to grapple with. Certainly in some of the complaints that we have seen, we would have their concerns about even disclosure of the nature of the disability that comes up. Sometimes the complaints, they don't even disclose the disability to us. So we're like, well, what is your disability? Do you, in fact, fall under the Act? Because we are left in a bit of an unclear position sometimes in terms of that. And so whether it is accommodation, I think whether it is education, all the areas the minister had identified, and this touches on some of the other things. I think the only time we're going to have that sea change is if persons with disabilities no longer have that fear of disclosure, that fear of speaking up, that fear of saying, if I disclose it, if it is not readily apparent, and if I disclose it, I will be discriminated against. I think they need to have that knowledge and that certainty that there is that protection, because those are some of the things that we are truly grappling with, as to whether you are a person with a disability, as was touched on, you may not view yourself as such, and that's, to me, great if you don't view yourself as such. But for you to get protection under the Act, it is not as broad-based as other legislation. It is limited to persons with disabilities. And then in order to be discriminated against, people have to know that you're a person with a disability, And this is where we also get into those types of issues where, you have someone said, well, I was discriminated against because of my disability. And then the response is, well, I didn't know you had a disability, you know. And so it then becomes a challenge to assess whether discrimination and that type of thing has truly taken place in those types of circumstances. And again, touching on that failure to register, because we also don't have medical knowledge to assess our role. We are very dependent on anyone coming with medical evidence. If you're not registered as a person with a disability, then you would need to come with medical evidence to establish the disability, because I can't look at anyone in this room and say whether you do or do not have a disability. If I were to do so, it would be to guess, and that's really not the role a tribunal should have. A tribunal has to act on facts, has to act on evidence that is before it. So I would say both in that area and in the broader areas, we do need to encourage those persons with disabilities to come forward, to know that they will be protected, you know, to have that knowledge that the protection mechanisms are in place. So disclose it, seek to act accordingly in any sphere, education, housing, workplace environment, or anywhere else, to step up, disclose it, expect proper treatment, you know, expect proper treatment. And if the persons you're interacting with fail to meet that bar, know that you will be protected, know that that mechanism exists for your protection. And I think if we can get to that point, we'll be much further along the process.
Ahead. You've spoken to, echoing some of the sentiments there from the perspective of the person with the disability. And I must say, Doc, I didn't even notice your hand. I'm sitting listening to her, and she's so animated, and I'm wondering, what disability? And then you mentioned your hand. And maybe just like you haven't seen it, there are others who don't see it as well. But whether or not we see it, whether or not we have the information or the evidence, there is still a requirement for employers, guess where I'm going next, to ensure that as much as possible there is compliance. You may not have specific figures, but how much compliance do you think exists with your members in the Jamaica Employers Federation, Sir Grant?
It is not something that is tracked, Paula. And I think we have an opportunity to gather that information so that we are all informed in terms of the prevalence of disability within the workplace, because we really don't know. A lot of persons who are employed in the workplace are employed because of someone who knows somebody who can give their child a little space to operate from, and that is basically how persons get employed. For the main, we see persons employed as own account workers. You know, they are artisans, they are entertainers, and so on, who, because of the skills they have, they're able to do more than just seek a job. They can employ themselves, and they in turn employ people as well. So we do see that there has been employment of persons with disabilities, but in general, where we see a concentration on a deliberate policy where this is concerned is in the public sector, whereby how it is structured and by law, we see them have to employ a certain number of persons within the public sector who have disabilities. But what are they employed to do? You mostly find them being telephone operators in some instances, because they may have intellectual disabilities. They're employed as handymen and so on. So they are low-skilled jobs. But when you have a conversation with someone who has a disability, you oftentimes find that the brain is extremely powerful and can do more. And again, another opportunity is presenting itself in the world of work, where persons can in fact use voice to text if they're visually impaired to engage with customers and clients, present documentation and so on. Voice recognition software now exists, so that when persons are speaking into a device, it recognizes and can generate the required response. Artificial intelligence and robotics are areas that are now coming out. I had the most interesting experience with an AI last night, that I believe that if we are able to use AI in a positive way with persons who have disabilities, then we can enhance their ability to work. And another area that I think persons with disability, particularly those that have accessibility issues, can do very, very well is in the area of remote work. And this is something that we saw happen extremely well during the COVID-19 period. And employers can use this as an opportunity to engage the best and brightest that may not be able to enter the brick and mortar space and have them engaged in a remote work environment so that they can contribute to their businesses and themselves, because we have to face the facts. Employers are in business to make money.
To make money.
And that's a truth. We can't avoid that. And if they are not able to recruit the best talent for their business, it now becomes them doing some sort of, forgive the phrasing, welfare type activity to say, okay, I'm doing this for the general good, but not necessarily because I am making a profit off this. So we have to determine whether or not our systems, educational systems and other support systems is generating the pool of workers that employers can look to say that I have already talent of people that I can choose to work in the spaces where I have need for people. A lot of what we are seeing in the workplace is coming out of enlightened personal, familial experiences. Persons did not understand and know anything about autism. We just thought that children were just slow and can't learn. And we recognize that there is a disability called autism. We recognize that persons might have other illnesses and appear on the spectrum, and it impacts the way they learn. And so we have an opportunity again, and I'm speaking about opportunities, to identify those persons who have other abilities. They may present themselves with disabilities, but they have other abilities that we know, based on our familial and other experiences, that we can tap into those abilities to make them worthwhile citizens. I have a son who has Down syndrome, but he's extremely functional, but he can't speak. And so based on my own enlightened experience, I have come to recognize that he has abilities that his sister, who is fully able, does not have. So these are things that we have to look at our familial and personal experience to determine how we support our children with education opportunities so that they can function when we are no longer around to support them. And I will also, since I'm on the floor, it comes down for an employer and the persons who they employ to access the services, and the lack of accessibility continues to impact employment. Sometimes it is not a permanent disability, it might be a temporary one, but because there's no access to services to help persons recover and to be rehabilitated properly, the disability becomes permanent. And now they are unable to earn as they were accustomed to. And when we talk about this, it's not necessarily a physical disability. Somebody could have had a stroke that renders them unable to speak or speak properly. And the job they had before was one that encourages persons to come to that job with the ability to speak well. How do we engage the person's brain? Because nothing has gone wrong with the brain, it's just their ability to speak that has been impacted. There is a role, I believe, for the national identification system to be expanded to recognize persons with disabilities and track them in the population so that when somebody presents themselves to access public services, their registration is there and it's clear that, yes, this person has a disability. And we have done, Minister Charles, when you were part of that program, and then Minister Green was part of that as well, a lot of work in bringing NIDS to where it is. And I suppose that it's not yet implemented. There is a ways and means that we can expand the registration to include persons with disabilities. Thanks.
That's a comprehensive response, many different elements. I know the minister wants to respond, and I want to give him the opportunity to speak. But ladies and gentlemen, he actually has to leave shortly. So, Minister?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paula. I was just saying that in relation to the NIDS, there's actually an international symbol that is now connected to the NIDS that does define disability. So we're hearing you loud and clear. I just want to say that this conversation cannot be a one-off anniversary conversation. We have to get it clear. We need to have consistent discussion, and discussion with the perspective that says if we challenge each other to be better, it doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong. I often say that legislation should be consistently amended, but sometimes in our region, we think an amendment means you're acknowledging that you do something wrong. That's why you're changing it. No, in other jurisdictions, it just means that you're evolving as society is evolving. What does that mean? It means, take a look on what's in your hand now. That phone is not the same phone you had 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And some of the legislation that we are speaking about is older than us. All right? So just as you have a new version of the Samsung and the iPhone and other brands every year, we should challenge ourselves to consistently evolve and improve in terms of the framework that we are using. Next, technology. As I said by Mr. Grant a while ago and echoed across the room, there's so much innovation and technology that will change the whole frontier of opportunity. A lot of what we take for granted now, I'm telling you, if we were born in earlier years, we would be in a completely different situation. And we want to be able to say, 10 years from now, that many of the persons who now feel constrained or restricted will not suffer that, because the technology would be the norm. It will be something that is standard, something that is adopted, accepted, and that you have access to. And that's the goal of I Am Able. I Am Able is supposed to design projects that will bring innovation and technology that is not often understood or seen. But with the help of UNICEF and other stakeholders, we'll be able to change the life trajectory of Jamaicans because of the introduction of knowledge, information, innovation, and the frameworks that break down a lot of the barriers. Jamaica we're a unique space. We're a very unique space. It was said before that many Jamaicans don't even know their disability. And every time I talk, it's a challenge for me because I don't know all the words to use, and I often use the wrong terms, so forgive me if I do. I'm learning as well, and I want all Jamaicans to learn with me because we grew up in a Jamaica that, trust me, if you grow up certain places and you have one hand, you're just one. And nobody don't really see anything different. You're just one. I have a friend named Blinds, one eye blind. And we don't see it that way. I mean, Blinds is just Blinds. And he doesn't see it that way. But the reality is that he still has challenges when he goes home that he's not telling us as his brethren. And so we want to applaud a country that is very accepting. But we also need to recognize that even in being accepting and being rough and tough, and we don't watch your issue, you have to come in and be like everybody fine. But we need equal opportunity, right? And beyond us being accepting, and it doesn't matter what happened to you, you're just one of us. When you go to the interview, you're not one of us. That's when you see the distinction and the discrimination. And so we applaud Jamaica. We are a unique society where I think we have all grown up. We're just saying it, Dr. Hendricks was just saying it to me, that, to us, that she didn't know of her disability. And I have many friends in my own circle who don't recognize themselves in that way. And that's good in one respect. But we also need to recognize that it does not remove the challenge that they face, particularly when they step out of the friend group and have to interact with corporate Jamaica, or they have to interact with a building that, okay, now you realize where the challenge is and the issue is arising. So I Am Able must serve as that conduit, as that channel to provide the connectivity between the solutions and the challenges. And I want to also think big. You know, I want to ask Jamaicans to think big. We have so many Jamaicans working overseas in Microsoft and Google and all of these big companies. Use us to try out your best technology. Right? Use us. We want to be the country that is cutting edge. We want to be the country that is opening doors, pioneering when it comes on to equal opportunity, accessibility, inclusivity, and creating integrated, fully integrated society. We can do it. I think we're in the right size, not too small, not too big. Everybody knows us, yes? And our name rings across the globe. And imagine a Jamaica where you turn on CNN or Fox, Paula, and you're hearing, and today in Jamaica, the I'm Able program
has been adopted by multiple countries across the world.
Well, I can't, you know, I was trying to put on my Paula voice all of it, you know. You see it? Yes, so she just come in and say, well, you know, you do the politics, leave this to me. But that's the vision. I hope you understand where I'm coming from and what I see. You know, when I talked to Dr. Dunn, when we first started to design all of this, you know, we were bubbling with energy, saying, oh, this can work. Now, I know it can work because Jamaicans have that indomitable spirit. But what we need to do now is to translate that spirit into some tangible guidelines. So all of the employers that work with Jeff will not just be called on or monitored, but rather empowered. Many employers want to or would, but don't know what to do. And the simple accessibility checklist is just a first step. So again, the I'm Able must now start to engage. We want to engage all of corporate Jamaica, all of the schools, all of the service clubs, all of the churches, in bringing them on board with this national campaign of knowing what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, and most importantly, why we're doing it.
Well said, Minister. Thank you so much. Are you staying a little longer?
Dr. Dunn will do the call to action and he will take over. They were asking us to see if we could do
A group
picture
shot.
before we leave.
Ladies, we don't put conversation done, but could you kindly assist? Watch out for the microphones and the attendant parts that may still be on the seat, particularly ladies. Doctor, you too, Minister. And you move a little closer together. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Minister. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move the conversation to explore some more the barriers being faced by persons with disabilities. And we're going to split the conversation so that we can focus first on the ones specifically with intellectual disabilities, and then we're going to move to those being faced by the deaf community as well. And we welcome Minister Dunn to the panel and the conversation. So the formal question, what are the most pressing barriers being faced by persons with intellectual disabilities, particularly when it comes to accessing education, employment, public services? And Dr. Marilyn McCoy will respond.
Thank you. Before I move into the barriers, I'd like to talk a little bit about the expectation of inclusion in relation to persons with intellectual disability. One thing I have learned, and I like the conversation around inclusion, because inclusion dictates that if you have to be intentional about what it is that you're going to be implementing. You have to ensure that people are immersed into whether a program or the society understands the person that you're talking about. Critical to this is about equality and the fact that the opportunities need to be provided, but not just the opportunities, but the support system must be in place. Let's talk a little bit about the barriers. Education. We do see a number of our children who, yes, we have come a long way in relation to school placement, but we do see a number of our children, based on where they are, accessing challenges, having challenges in moving or getting into a school program near to them. And I'm specifically talking about rural Jamaica now. While the services, educational programs, special education programs are in Kingston and St. Andrew, when you move into rural Jamaica, you do have a challenge. I specifically talk about the schools that are accessible in main towns, and the people with intellectual disability are not necessarily in those main towns, and the transportation challenge to get them to that point is always a barrier. I've spoken to parents who will tell you, especially in Western Jamaica, I live in Negril. The closest school for my child is in Sablamar. I have to pay up to $4,000 in any week or even a day to get my child into or accessing programs. We have had children who live in St. Thomas, and they must access secondary education, and they do it in Kingston. The families are not able to afford those, and therefore you have to arrange special bus systems to be able to take those children to and from school. Now, intellectual disability have varying levels, and therefore there are some who will be able to commute independently with training, but there's also going to be a group of people who will need a lot more support. And this is where the families come in now. There are a number of our families or parents who cannot work because they have to take the children to school. And even at one of our schools, and I am a part of the JADE network of schools, if you should happen to come into Kingston one day and drive into, for example, our Randall Lopez School, you will see a number of parents who are gathered in a particular area. They take the children to school, but they cannot afford to go back home And so they remain at school to ensure that the reduction in bus fares. The fact that the children may have a subsidized bus fare, the families do not have that luxury. It's very challenging also for our children who need therapeutic care, because if we talk about children with intellectual disability, we are not necessarily talking about the academic success of that child. We're looking at the ability of the child to navigate his community, social skills management. We're also looking at those who experience medical behavioral challenges and therefore will need therapeutic support. Now, therapeutic support means that it is costly to access that kind of service, and there is also a paucity of those kinds of services in the educational environment. What does that mean? It therefore means that parents will not access those services. And those children will need those kinds of services in order for them to reach their fullest potential or to achieve to their fullest potential. Now, educational barriers is a lack of support systems, right? We have come a long way, and let me just pause to say that, but we do have a long way to go. The access to specialist skills, not just the special educator, you know, the different kinds of support personnel who are required to make the educational system more effective. There is also a shortage of those persons. And we're not just talking about we're talking about the basic ones who provide just assistance to the children, right? What we call our teacher's aides, or persons who will assist the teacher to, you know, navigate the classroom experience more effectively. In addition to that, and I will move a little bit out of education and move into post-school life. This is where a number of our people, there is a gap in services. The school program has a partnership with the government of Jamaica. And this partnership has enabled the expansion of the school program right across the island. And so we have a school in 13 of the 14 parishes. And we also have additional schools outside of that. But the problem also is that there are some critical areas. Then we talk about assessment, and I know Ms. Gontagale is looking at me because this is an area of need. These are professionals who are in very short supply, and their services are extremely expensive. And so we, as a country moving forward, we have to look at programs or initiatives or what it is that we're going to do to strengthen that arm. It is the first point of contact for the education system, and so we have to look at it seriously in order to strengthen that element. Now, the post-school is where my passion is, and we're talking about the adults who have spent up to 5, 6, 7 years in the school system, and when they exit, they move into a life of nothingness. And I say that because when you are accustomed to going to school every day for 7 years, and then you graduate and there is nothing for you to do. Now, I know my organization has made some efforts to implement adult programs here in Kingston and St. Andrew, but the truth is that it does take significant financial resources to strengthen that arm. And this is where ministries like the Ministry of Labor and Social Security comes in, because we have to look at partnerships to strengthen these elements that are these gaps to the people that we serve. And so here we are with limited adult services. And when we talk about adult services for this population of people, I'm talking about continuing education. skills training. I'm talking about a simple thing as social and recreational programs. A lot of us take that for granted. When the children leave the special education program, their social network is actually cut, right? They go home. Many do not have friends. But if you can get an opportunity to bring them together in a social or a recreational program, they can, strengthen their social skills. They can also ability are at risk for loneliness and homelessness. Why? For the very same reason, right? That you have to be deliberate in ensuring that they are engaged socially and engaged in relation to meaningful work.
So there has to be a path for them and their lives, not just
Definitely.
go to school.
No, unemployment signifies adulthood. And if there is no expectations when it comes to employment, so what am I living for then?
Seems like many opportunities again for collaboration. We are echoing some of the same kinds of sentiment. And I wanted to know if some of the perspectives you're seeing, yes, it is intellectual disability versus being visually impaired. What are some of the parallels that you are finding, if any, Madame Marriott Blake?
Interestingly enough, I said, okay, well, I can start with ditto. Because many of the issues are across the board. We are in an environment where, unfortunately, disability is still seen in some communities as not a positive situation for a family. And so you do have individuals who pretend like it does not exist for their children. For us at the Association for the Deaf, a core challenge that we have is getting the parent to move from, you had this vision for this child, and you now have a diagnosis that looks different, means that your entire life looks a little different. Here is where you need to make sure that you can provide the relevant support so this child can see even a glimpse of the vision you had before. And I say that because the reality is, especially in some families that have, let's face it, many of the young men or the young women would have been brought up in families where you're supposed to go to this school. Because every man in the family went to this school. And so having a child who is deaf may mean that, no, that child is not going to be in the best education placement to go to that high school. And it does require a readiness of the family to say, okay, so we are going to support you and facilitate and ensure that you are provided with all the resources you need to thrive wherever you go.
You're so passionate about this. Are you saying you're not seeing that?
We don't see it as much as we need to. We don't see it as much as we need to. I think about the fact that so the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, interestingly, back in 1938, so before even Christine's timeline, it was a family and a group of persons from the United Kingdom who came and said, we need to establish a system so people can have better. The deaf community deserves more. And they would have adopted quite a bit of what they saw happening in the UK at the time and the level of support that church groups were doing to provide a space for spiritual engagement, education, social support, and employment. And in the 70s, when education for all became, very, very much a part of the standard, that interestingly is where JADE and JAD kind of came together and said, so you said for all, right? And pushing for that conversation to move to, let's make sure the schools and the facilities that are in place do get that support from the government as a part of that mandate. And so as Marilyn mentioned, we have seen a fruitful relationship thus far with the Ministry of Education in facilitating execution of education support for, in my case, preschool to secondary. But when Marilyn mentioned that post-secondary, it is a real shift. A real shift because for many of our children, you go to school every day and there are people there who communicate and engage just like you. We have kids they're stressed to go home in the summer because mommy can't sign and daddy can't sign, and I have 6 siblings and nobody can sign. So I literally go home to an environment of
silence.
Just an engagement that moves from so much to nothing. And it is heart-rending when you think about Christmas, when you think about Grand Gala, and you think about all of these different activities that happen throughout the year. To what extent are our children being engaged? To what extent do you feel a part of your family? You know, a lot of that builds from 0 to 18 makes a difference with what happens when you leave high school. When you don't have that level of support and that level of engagement, you leave high school and think, all right, so nothing I go on. And without the right support, communication support, you know, I applaud this government and the level of effort that has gone into ensuring that a sign language interpreter is a part of parliamentary proceedings. An interpreter is a part of press conferences and so on. And that's important because what it says to the general public is, this is the standard that we need to be at all the time. I applaud where we see some of our public sector partners kind of making an effort to say, so we have programs, but they're not quite there yet. Let's talk about how we can get to that point where a student who is deaf gets into a HEART program and we're not trying to figure out, all right, what we're
Universal design.
We do have private sector partners that will reach out to the sector and say, listen, we're doing 6 programs and we need to make sure that some of them are disability specific. What are some of the issues that you need us to address? But then we think about things like accessing resources. Because until we get to the point where our general nightly news has an interpreter, the deaf community is not aware of what's happening. Until we get to the point where content that's created for public consumption does have appropriate accessibility kind of just built in.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves a population completely unaware of what's happening. When you think about the emergency situations, for many of us in the room, we just pick up the phone and you're 119 and you can have a conversation to address your need. But the deaf community have to find a neighbor. And that's a critical issue when you think about just basic access to service. And it moves a little further now when you have a young person who decides they are determined because they're going to get that work, you know. And they probably have not put on their resume that they are deaf. Interestingly, I have seen some resumes coming from students where they will note they went to Listermere Gilby High, but the part that says for the deaf is left off because they don't want that to be the first thing that's noted on the resume and seen as, but we see where some employers have moved to a space where applications are accepted online, you're getting communication about interviews via email, and you can then respond and say, you know, I will need access at this interview, and they'll say, please explain further. You know, what does that access look like for you? But then there are others who the minute that question about access comes in, and then it's beyond that. So you've gotten the job. You now need an interpreter for staff meetings, for your performance appraisal, for that conversation with your supervisor. And it requires a budgetary allocation, a shift in the way we think, in how we allocate resources to ensure that there is money allocated for accessibility. Knowing that this may mean an interpreter, this may mean having certain documents prepared in Braille, it may require having a communication aid for that first few weeks of employment. You know, Marilyn and I, we do have 2 education programs that are joint facilities where we have students who are deaf as well as some students with intellectual disabilities. And we see that shift in disability where quite a few I have one location in Port Antonio, and let me tell you, of the 8 students, 6 of them need Marilyn's support because the face of disability, if you will, has changed. And then it means now that a child who gets a hearing assessment or someone who gets a hearing assessment, and it's acknowledged that you do have hearing loss in both ears, but then in the classroom you're seeing something else. So we now need someone who's going to be able to do an assessment of that child's intellectual capacity with an appreciation for the fact that this assessment cannot be done in an auditory way. It's a mind shift of so many things. And, you know, one of the things I've said to people is if you think about how the last week of your life has been, how many times have you depended on something that requires the telephone to be able to access a service or hearing information to be able to access a service? What would your service delivery experience be like if you did not have the option to hear?
If you know, we should probably try just walking around with a pair of headphones on.
Oh, that makes a difference too. Oh,
put a set of headphones on to see what life is like. No sound. and then maybe we would begin to understand. It sounds like, it would sound like Wakanda Dark. But I don't think that is the case, particularly with programs like this. I am able. I want to, before I bring the questions in, can I see the hands of those of you that have questions? I know it stimulated ideas, etc. So we have at least 2 questions, and maybe I should take the three. Take the questions before we come back. I want you to, each of you, to end with a 30 to 60 second description of what you think is the spark in what appears to be the dark. What is that one thing that you think is helping to pull us together as a nation in the right direction? The question for the minister is different because he now has to speak to the people generally, and what you think we need to do to be more sensitive to those of us that are living with disabilities. So I'm giving you time to think about it and to make it concise while we step out and see if we can accommodate the questions. We have the microphone. You raise your hand, and here we go. So if you could say your name and then ask the question.
Conrad Harris, Jamaica Society for the Blind. My question is, we have been doing very well in terms of reducing unemployment rate. I believe we are below 4.5% or somewhere there. But at least from where I sit, we're not really seeing it reflected in the employment of persons with disabilities. So in looking at the budget, I see that we have the Ministry of Economic Growth and Employment Creation and Job Creation, which has a budget of $30 billion. So I wanted to find out if we could exercise our minds and think about some of the ways that, some of the things we should be doing to ensure that when that budget is expended, it has some impact on the persons with disabilities who will now have jobs, so that maybe next year or the next 2 years, maybe the tax can be reduced because we have more persons involved in commercial activities and paying government tax. Mm-hmm. So that's my question.
Thank you, Conrad. Good to see you. And so I would like to ask either Dr. Hendricks or the minister to respond. Which of you would like to?
Well, if I may, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy not just for the question, but for the conversation here today. I mean, this conversation is just awesome in so many ways. But your point is right. I mean, unemployment is now down to 3.6%. And I would say, and falling. Because, I mean, we came from a high of about 14, I mean, in terms of youth unemployment from 21%. They are now to 3.6%. And you're correct in that, this is a cohort of persons that we have seen in so many ways that excels in places of employment or wherever they are placed. That's one of the distinguishing factor for persons with disabilities. We see that they tend to work far more and more efficiently than some able-bodied persons. And we saw recently, especially during COVID, as you had mentioned, COVID, where individuals with disabilities were tapped by one financial institution in Jamaica because they wanted to include them as much in that employment figure, but not just the figure itself, but because we know that these persons are really good at what they do. And you'd have also heard the minister spoke earlier about the overseas employment program, where we are now including persons, and employers are requesting more persons with disabilities because of what they've seen and the capacity and capability that they've seen with persons who have gone on the program. So going forward, I know, I mean, especially when you reach a figure at 3.6%, you're almost at full employment or approaching full employment, then it means that everyone who has ability must be, not just will be, must be included in the employment pool. And that is one of the reasons why this campaign of I Am Able showcases individuals who are in fact able to work, irrespective of the disabilities that the persons have, because we all know that they're able. And going forward, I'm certain that everyone who has an ability will be employed because of just the fact that we have reached this position that nobody believed that we would have ever reached in this country, where we see an unemployment figure of 3.6%.
It augurs well. It augurs well. We have a question at the Giovanni Dennis, and you will come after the minister's friend. Remind me of your name, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Ovestra King.
There we go.
From Clarendon side. My question today I want to ask is the Disability Act is a law that if anybody breaks that law would have to pay some form of penalty, I guess, because I see wearing persons working with an organization, governmental organization, and that person have a disability or obtain a disability on the job, and that organization terminate that person just like that. And I'm saying that the Disability Act is out when that organization do such. So I'm asking the question, if that organization will have to pay the penalty, knowing that the government passed the disability law, is like a disrespect to the government, and it is a government organization. So I'm just wondering if that organization have to pay any consequence to the government.
So I would want to take that.
Go ahead, Doc.
Right. The individual needs to file a complaint to the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, who will investigate. That is the way that it will reach the tribunal. That is where the matter will be heard. So if you can encourage him to write formally, or we do have a complaints form that can be filled out, or support can be provided to assist the individual to complete that form or write that letter, then that complaint can be made. But it starts with the complaint, filing the complaint.
We have step one, and then the systems are in place.
Yeah.
Yes, so once the matter is investigated and it is referred to the tribunal again would hear evidence as to what has taken place, would hear both sides, and then if it is that the tribunal determines that there has been a breach of the act, then the tribunal is empowered to hand down an award that would address that situation, which can include a monetary figure for compensation. Bearing in mind, of course, you have that interaction with compensation for injury on the job, which is what I call a civil remedy. So you are entitled to be compensated for an injury on the job outside of the disabilities legislation. So those two things would need to be considered by that person, but the tribunal is empowered to award a sum to somebody who has suffered a breach of the act against the person who has engaged in the conduct that is in breach of the act.
Thank you. Our next question. Oh, Minister?
And Dr. Andrews can assist me here, is that, I mean, cases like those are cases where it's not uncommon. And just to say that we have had to date 55 referrals, of which 29 29 has been settled. 8 is with the tribunal now, and 1 has been referred to the dispute resolution. So the mechanism exists for cases like those to be heard.
It's for us to be deliberate about the process and official with the complaint. Thank you.
Most of the cases, matters are resolved, which indicates that there is a readiness to, in some cases, or in most cases that we have received so far, to remedy the situation before it escalates. Yeah.
That is a spark.
It is.
In the dark. Mr. Dennis, and I believe we had 2 other questions on this side as well. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank to the Minister. On a day when we're launching the I Am Able Foundation, and I heard the comment about the sign language interpreter at Parliament, which is a big step forward. There has been complaints, several complaints from persons within the deaf community saying the size of the person doing the interpreting at Parliament is too small. I don't know who is monitoring the YouTube page right now. It's live on JIS TV. The size
of the image. The size of the image
of the person doing the interpreting is actually too small, and they're actually on the page right now complaining, saying, could we increase the size of the box to at least 3 to 3.5 inches? And this is one of the complaints that many persons in the various communities of, different communities of people with disabilities raise, that they aren't truly included in the discussion. And this is a prime example because it's been on the JIS channel right now, live streamed. And so the people who are watching, even though this is happening, they don't feel like they're a part of the conversation. In fact, a message I have received from someone in the disabled community is saying, essentially, if you're not willing to share a meal with us, then don't tease us by letting us smell it. Either share or don't offer at all. And they're sharing examples from the World Federation of the Deaf in terms of better sizes that can be done so that people who are deaf can properly follow online or participate or be involved generally going forward. So both right here with the launching the I Am Able campaign, when are we going to fix things like this? And one as well for Parliament, the size of the screen that shows the interpreter. To the Minister or whoever else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. That I believe should be simple to fix, right? So I mean, in addition to what the minister is championing now, I mean, I will ensure that I have that discussion also with JIS to ensure that that situation is remedied.
Thank you, Minister. We have another question. No.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to say your name and then ask the question?
My name is...
You can, if you could stand, we could find you better on the camera. There we go. Yes.
My name is Delroy Wilson, and I'm with a company, Jam Spice Natural. I got a grant from the Jamaica Society for Jamaica Disability Foundation, which now Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, sorry. So now I'm the owner of a care home. The care home is Jam Spice Natural and Home Care. I'm presently building out, because I'm a community person. I believe in community building. So now I'm building out a factory that is 133 square feet factory space now for other person to work. So the Disability Foundation and the disability, person with disability can do and employ other persons. So in order for that, right now, so I like to tell person, community. So there's a lot of things I would like to see in my community to build my community, and I'm leading by example. For example, I like to say a lot of the services that is being rendered for disability, persons with disability. If we can use, like say for example, the post office, just a chair and a desk, and bring in persons who can assist persons to register their business, to make it easier. So we can do it community by community and bring in this essential service closer to the people rather than have all of them in Kingston. I thank you.
Success story. And those stories we love to hear. Thank you. We had other questions. There were at least 4. You had yours, and we had, okay. Please, Minister.
I just want to make a comment here. And, you know, when you hear testimonies like these, it is gratifying to know that not just the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities and the team there that's doing the work, but the government of Jamaica who is providing these grants on behalf of taxpayers, of course. And it is actually reaching individuals who are making meaningful contribution. And again, that is what the I Am Able campaign is about. Not just advocating for persons with disabilities, but also to showcase individuals who have done well and who is interested in not just themselves, but other persons with disability and the community that they live in. And I'm very thankful for that, sir. And, you know, it's gratifying to know that, you know, we're actually reaching individuals and we're doing something good.
And Minister, as we move now into the final stages of our conversation, I want to ask you to then transition to the question that I had for you. So we've been speaking about how organizations and entities can help with mainstreaming the accessibility. We had mentioned from the Honorable Minister earlier about how we as Jamaicans oftentimes don't see disability because it's just my brethren or my friend. But outside of that circle, he mentioned, the disability sometimes is what we see first. Do you have a suggestion, Minister, for how we can change that culture as Jamaicans so that we are more sensitive to the needs without discriminating against?
Well, you mentioned the comment from the minister, and I actually made the same comment in an interview earlier, that I'm from a rural community, and we do have persons with disabilities in the rural community, but we've never seen them as individuals who are not able. We have never seen them. We call them one, we call them all the different names. You know, Jamaica is a country of aliases, so we have a lot of aliases for a number of individuals. But conversation like this, and this conversation needs to be a mainstream conversation. So, I mean, our media houses are here. I mean, maybe we'll have vlogs or, you know, blogs on this particular conversation here today. But it has to be a mainstream conversation. Because just by listening today and hearing the conversations of even a person with disabilities, just even the thought that Giovanni mentioned about the size of the screen. I mean, these are conversations that person would not normally even think about. And therefore, this type of conversation with not just panelists, but persons who have first-hand knowledge of these issues and the issues that's affecting the disabled community will go a far way in increasing the sensitization. But I also want to make 2 observations, and it's observations from persons in other countries. I mean, we know that the 36th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, suffered a disability. I mean, polio was his disability. But yet still, he was one of the greatest presidents of the United States. We see a president in Ecuador, I believe, Moreno. Huh? He was vice president first, I think between 2007 to 2013. He was a vice president, and he became the president of Ecuador. I know what he did. And Dr. Hendricks is the one who first alluded to this information because I didn't know about it. He went on a massive campaign across the entire country, sensitizing persons about persons living with disabilities. And that is one of the things we're hoping to capture in the I Am Able campaign. We want not just our social workers, and Dr. Hendricks spoke eloquently about just in the 13th parish, but that's not enough. That's just a speck of the cadre of person that we want to carry on this message about persons living with disability and sensitizing persons to the extent that it becomes a conversation that person will have almost every day. So not because we accept persons in the communities that we are from of having disability and we don't see them as that, but we hear the challenges of persons after they leave school, what happens? After they leave that space, what happens? I mean, that is something that I don't think persons really think about a lot. Because through ESP and other government departments and agencies, we see the work with the Ministry of Education, with our institutions, we see the shadows and we see the extent to which resources are being made available now to persons with disabilities. So much more needs to be done. And therefore, a massive campaign that we hope to achieve with this I Am Able campaign, with sensitized persons enough that these are our brothers and sisters. These are persons who must be brought into the fold, not just during their early lives, but life after school. Because that is where the rubber hits the road. It's a long life after that. And where are we with those individuals? So I believe we're actually on a quest. I mean, Jamaica joins the UN in 1962, and you heard earlier about when we were one of the first persons to sign on to this chapter. So Jamaica is and has been sensitized a lot about persons with disabilities. And the Prime Minister spoke quite clearly about this next chapter that we're building in this country. And this I Am Able campaign is a part of the next chapter that we're building in Jamaica. This inclusive Jamaica, where we recognize all abilities and never focus on a disability. This is the Jamaica that we're building. And here is where we're heading in this next chapter.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Dr. Hendricks, how do you give us your closing comments, your 60 seconds, or, a little bit more, but inspire us with what you believe is that spark in the dark?
We are at a good place. We are at a good place, and having journeyed or walked the road myself, having joined the council since 1999, there's quite a bit I would have seen and experienced to echo the fact that we're at a good place. It's a place where a conversation of disability has never been had in this space. And when I say in this space, I'm talking about the Office of the Prime Minister. And what it says to me is that disability inclusion is progressing to the next step, the next level. To take this conversation nationally, to engage partners of all kinds, not only our international partners that would have had this mandate, but to actually see the call and the implementation taking place here in Jamaica. To have the Employers Federation sitting around and in the same space and talking about what is required. Hearing our journalists indicating and advocating what is required. And it is coming full circle, perhaps, to persons understanding, organizations, different ones, understanding the role that they need to play. Government, private sector, international partners, and not only stretching our hands to donors internationally, but here in Jamaica, where we have resources, we have partnerships, critical partnerships that can be forged here to build on our training and educational opportunities for persons with disabilities. We have the National Training Agency, the HEART National NSDA, right? That is a critical partner that I see as a spark to enabling and empowering the lives of persons with disabilities post-secondary education. They too have a vast number of opportunities that persons with disabilities, like what Mr. Wilson spoke of, economic empowerment opportunities, far greater than the JCPD could ever give, because what we would have provided wasn't anything large, I'm sure. But there are other programs within government that provide economic empowerment that persons with disabilities can tap into. And so it is employment, it is self-employment, it is recognizing that there are opportunities for protection for those persons with disabilities who are fearful. I did speak with, a small constituent of persons with disabilities recently to indicate that job seekers have been saying, we're not seeing people with disabilities at our job fairs. And the fact that I was like, so why is it that you don't show up? And the person indicated, Dr. Hendricks, discrimination is real. However, the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, the process through the JCPD, is that spark that can help to reduce that fear that the person with disabilities themselves have that is preventing them from putting themselves forward as the valuable human beings that they are. And so there are so many, there's so much synergy that can be created and opportunities that this discussion, I'm sure, has opened, and this initiative will drive, and I look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks. Mr. Leiber?
Well, I can only build on and add to what has been said before. The tribunal is here not just in an adversarial way. One of the things that I have engaged in is a mediation between the parties to try and help to come to an agreement. So if you are fearful as a member of the disabled community that you need to have an expensive lawyer or representative, you do not, right? The tribunal actually, the award, we're about to hand down our first award. Just correcting some typos. But where it is that a member of the disabled community comes before the tribunal, they can't afford or unable to have representation, we assist wherever possible. So our role, yes, is to be objective to decide, but we try to ensure that it's a balance so that no one is prejudiced based on their financial capability or lack thereof. So the tribunal is there to create that system of equity, to create that system where you feel heard, where you feel your complaint is heard, your concern is heard, and try to arrive at the best solution. So we're like a baby. We just started up very recently. We're, growing, putting in place the structures that we need in order to properly and efficiently do the statutory remit. We are also, as a member of one of our panels, have a member of the visually impaired community who fully participated, helped to draft that award that we are about to hand down, and there was no limitation any at all in that participation, in that adjudicatory role. And I think that's perhaps one of the first visually impaired persons, as far as I'm aware, who has participated in that adjudicatory function as a member of a tribunal. And so we are there on both sides, both to provide employment opportunities for members of the disabled community, as well as ensuring equity, ensuring that that balance is kept. So we're here, we're ready to serve, and also to fulfill that mandate to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities are preserved, protected, and also they're empowered to go out to that job fair, go out to that school, go out to, because we have dealt with education disputes, we have dealt with hospital, we have dealt with workplace. So we have dealt with almost all the areas that you can think of. And so each type of matter requires a slightly different approach, you know, but we are here to cover the full ambit of concerns that can arise.
You're championing the cause.
Championing the cause.
Thank you, Mr. Leiber. Madame Marilyn McCoy, I saw you get passionate earlier. You wanted to make a comment then.
You know, I'm very encouraged about this conversation today. I'm more encouraged by the implementation of the Act. Moving forward, I think it really is that framework that will drive progress going forward. You know, I want to respond to that question that Conrad asked earlier, because it is very dear to me and my organization and the people we serve. And that's the whole issue of employment. I think we are at this stage where we need to seriously look at best practices outside of Jamaica. What is it that builds the visibility of people with disabilities in employment? It definitely will not be an employer hosting a job fair and calling people to apply for positions, because there are a number of people with disabilities who have personal barriers, in addition to the attitudinal and the societal barriers that will inhibit their participation in employment. But one of the best practices globally is that the state has to look at opportunities to implement special programs with incentives so that employers can actually feel free to allow people with disabilities within the workplace, because only then will they truly understand the work and worth of people when they come face to face with them in employment. And it is going to be those special programs that will enable that. The other thing I want us to think about, we are not seeing the numbers. Yes, it is great to hear about the national numbers, but it's not reflected among this population of people. Why? Because of that exact barrier. We have to look at employment differently. Employment, if you want to allow the persons to achieve their fullest potential, employment can be customized, right? Employment is not all 9 to 5. Employment can be seasonal. Employment can, you can actually customize a job based on the strengths of the person and just exclude the general person within the workplace from some of these mundane tasks. When you customize an employment or a job task for somebody with a disability, and I'm speaking about persons with intellectual disability. So we are at a stage now where we should be open to ideas in relation to how can we push the employment agenda, what can we do to increase the participation of people with intellectual disability in employment. The conversation will continue, but there are things that we can do in the interim. Education, sensitization. Let me tell you, the only thing that can reduce stigma and discrimination is education. You cannot have it any other way. When people understand who the persons are, when the people see the potential of the people with disability, you have already convinced them.
Then
so
we
education
will have
is important.
Thank you so much, Madame McCoy. Mrs. Marriott Blake.
So in trying to see the positives in all things, I have found many sparks. The first spark that I would want to note is, so I have a personal belief that partnership is lifeblood. It is the breath in lungs for civil society. It is a critical part in ensuring that we're actually able to do what needs to be done, leaning on the strengths that we do have. So for me, one of the areas that I see as a spark that has capacity to grow even further is looking at the relationship that exists with the Ministry of Education and seeing how we can modify those relationships as they exist now with stakeholders like JADE and JAD, and seeing how that can be duplicated ministry to ministry. And I say that because, so for example, through the JAD group of schools, we would have received endorsement from the Ministry of Education for a Jamaican Sign Language grammar curriculum. In layman's terms, teaching sign language in the same way that hearing persons would have learned English, right? That curriculum becomes the basis on which we can have a further conversation about having Jamaican Sign Language recognized as a national language, which is critical for us to get to the point where we are able to say, not only do we recognize you as a community, but we understand and appreciate the unique communication need that you have. So that is this one spark. Another spark I found is, you know, it's amazing to me when I am able to hear the advocacy coming from not just the population of persons with disabilities, but from some of the stakeholders who once upon a time were not on our side. And I say not on our side because the language used once upon a time in the media did not give the impression of capacity and empowerment. So when I hear Giovanni advocating for the people that he's seen online, to me, that's a spark. And it's an important spark because our media, at the end of the day, it's them, the people that believe. It's not me and Marilyn, right? There's a level of trust that is held with the media that is important for us to not ignore. And the influencers online, you know, I've seen where Terry Carrell, for example, has pushed the conversation about persons who are deaf and persons with disabilities in spaces that Marilyn and I may not go. You know, so the critical importance and the advocacy coming from our media partners or influencers and just stakeholders who will go in a room and say, all right, so in the case here, but my child, and then what? You know, that is a spark that I think helping to empower parents and stakeholders and family members and friends to be able to say, yeah, but it's giving a little discrimination and I want us to fix it. That is something that I think is an amazing spark that we don't want to lose sight of and we need to encourage more. The final spark for me would be the way that the deaf community in particular has advocated for themselves. In the spectrum of disability, oftentimes we hear about advocacy coming from individuals who are blind or visually impaired. We don't necessarily hear about advocacy coming from persons with intellectual disabilities or persons who are deaf. And so seeing that readiness to advocate, and to me personally, I do connect it back to the fact that when interpreters are available, the people engage and then the people respond. And so that push to have interpreters more visible and more readily accessible, we need to fix the caption, the picture. We need to fix it. And we know that is something that is an issue to be addressed. But the fact that the people are now able to engage with the content and able to share is a reminder that they are accessing what's going out there. When it is made accessible, I will engage. And it is a reminder too that there is the technology that's available to help us make it better. And so those are the sparks for me that I think we can build on, that we can cascade, that we can use as just starter points even in how we make the I Am Able campaign even better as an accessible area, as a trusted source of support and engagement between the various stakeholders in partnership.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Grant, you have that final minute.
Thank you. And well, I should say thank you. That's one thing I learned interacting with persons in the community. We have to push the education of our employers. I think it's important. It's not that they are not sensitive to the needs, but there's a lack of education that I think I know the Jamaica Employers Federation will have to step in and engage with our employers to assist with the communication around the challenges that people in the community are having on how it is that we can create the space and the environment there, but we can't do it alone. You would have heard some of the things that have been said in terms of how do we create an enabling environment for persons with disabilities to function properly in the school, in the workplace, and after work. Because a lot of what we are seeing as well is that after people reach the age when they can no longer work, how do they continue to sustain themselves? So we have a wide conversation that we need to have around how it is that as a society, and in particular as a business community, employers are now going to be able to lobby and advocate for what we need to ensure that we can put into play what is necessary. Because most employers don't want to go before Mr. Leiber. And from the space that I used to sit, they don't like to go before any tribunal at all. So if they are educated and trained in terms of the best ways to approach dealing with persons who have special abilities, then they are better able to manage those, and we won't find themselves having to pay out exorbitant costs in settling these matters. So it's something that we would want to do at Jeff, is to deepen the education about the Disabilities Act, about the I Am Able initiatives and other initiatives that support this particular initiative, and to lobby and to create a business environment that can facilitate employers doing the best that they can for the community that they draw employment from.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been around the world, and I have encountered so many different aspects of the community, of the issues. We're talking about the need for a census for persons with disabilities. How do we identify them? We're talking about being intentional about policies in order to facilitate change. We are learning about that fear of disclosure, and I think we can understand that and the discrimination that may come with it. What else do we need? We've heard the suggestion of maybe integrating it with the national identification system, and how far along the process is that it is possible to accommodate that kind of integration. We've heard about perhaps an accessibility checklist that we can inquire about as employers, not necessarily with big companies, but just as a little one or two, a company with a few employees. We have pretty much been provided with the information about what we need to consider when we're looking not only at mainstreaming disability inclusion, but how we create an inclusive Jamaica where all we see, to quote the minister, are abilities. And so the question is, what am I going to do when I step out of here to further the conversation? And words were thrown at media, so I take that other hat on. It's a question I'm seriously considering. And the other part of the question is, what are you going to do outside of this room and in your arena? What you did do was be a part of our time together, and we are so appreciative. As we pull things together, we're going to ask the Honorable Minister to deliver the formal call to action. Can we welcome Minister Dunn to the microphone, please?
Thank you very much, Paula. Thank you very much. You hear me? But before I speak, though, for persons who would not have the benefit of sharing spaces with persons with disability, I want to mention one in particular. Now, in December, Mr. Zulu, we had a staff party at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And of course, Brittany was there. Brittany was there. Yeah, Brittany, right? Let me tell you, she took the dance floor. Am I correct? She took the dance floor, and let me tell you, it was just amazing to watch her dance. And that shows that we are very much able. We're very much able. But I want to say it's an honor for me to have participated in this discussion here today. And I'm sure you all would say it was a conversation that the time was not only well spent, but it was an opportune time to speak more about persons with and living with disabilities. And therefore, this movement is dedicated to fostering an inclusive Jamaica where persons with disabilities are empowered, valued, and given equal opportunity to thrive. In Jamaica, the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities has been at the forefront of advocating for the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. Yet, true inclusion goes beyond policies. It requires a shift in mindset, a commitment from every sector of our society, and a recognition that ability is not defined by disability. The I Am Able campaign is about breaking barriers, challenging stereotypes, and creating spaces where everyone, regardless of their ability, can contribute meaningfully, whether in education, employment, or social engagement. We must ensure that no one is left behind. So as we embark on this journey, let us reaffirm our commitment to inclusivity, equity, and empowerment. Together, we can build a Jamaica where abilities shines beyond limitations and where every individual has an opportunity to realize his full potential. Today is a call for action and a call to support the I Am Able initiative. The I Am Able initiative needs your support to break down barriers, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the diverse abilities and potential of everyone. You can play a part in ensuring access, donate and raise awareness, and advocate for policy changes. Every contribution makes a difference. In creating access, ensure that your space where you are, your services, and the products that you offer are offered in such a way where especially accessibility is at the heart of what you do. Raise awareness. Share the message of inclusivity everywhere that you go. And of course, you'd have heard Dr. Hendricks spoke about earlier about finances. Donate where possible. Donate where possible. And of course, we will continue to advance the advocacy for persons with disabilities. This is our time. This is as we embark on the next chapter for Jamaica. This is your moment. And this is not only, as Dr. Hendricks has said earlier, that we are in a good space. We want to be in a much better space as we continue to advance the rights of persons with disabilities. This is the call for action today, and I want you all to join us as we continue down this pathway to ensure that every Jamaican is included in every single thing that we do. Jamaica is ours. And I repeat it, Jamaica is ours. To use Jamaican word, alafiwi, afiwi. So let us join together and ensure that persons with disabilities have their rightful place in this country, Jamaica, land we love. Thank you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we give you the opportunity to go forth and do as the minister has suggested. It has been my pleasure hosting the time together this morning into afternoon. We'd like to invite you to, as you are on your way out, enjoy the refreshments that are provided for you in the lobby. We're asking the panelists to remain. We still have something to conclude inside, but it has been a wonderful time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.